Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Alien vs. Predator Galaxy podcast, the original Alien and Predator podcast. OG. Actually, I feel like AVP Outpost may have had one before we did, but they lasted like 2 or 3 episodes.
Original and longest running. There we go.
Yeah. Oh, man, I haven't thought about that website for a while. They were the Planet AVP spin-offs from like 2010s, something like that. Anyway,
I don't know if I ever frequented that one. Yeah,
it didn't last long. I think Sil used to go on there. I think that's the right website. Already tangenting off about 20 years ago, 10, 15 years ago even.
Living in the past. That's we do too much of that.
The 2000s and the 2010s were the best. 2020s have been the worst fucking decade that I have experienced. But we've done fun stuff this year.
Oh yeah. It's been busier times than we've ever had this past year, and I expect it'll be even busier this year. So,
this regular host, Aaron Percival, aka Corporal Hicks, and joining me as always is my brother in arms,
Adam Zeller. Oh, sorry. Let me let you finish your spiel there. Adam Zeller, aka RidgeTop.
Indeed, and we are back for episode 203 of the podcast. And we've got a nice one today, haven't we, Adam? Who are we talking to?
So we are talking to studio executive, which I believe is the first studio executive we've ever spoken with, Jorge Saralegui, about his time during the development of Alien Resurrection, which is a movie I have grown to love the older I've gotten. But this was a really great conversation. It's kind of like that conversation we had with Rex Pickett, where we're in the middle of chatting. I'm like, wow, this is just not the kind of interview we usually have here at AVP Galaxy, but it's kind of more interesting because of that. So
that's not to say the vibe of Jorge's interview is anything like Rex's interview, no. But no, it was certainly a much more frank and honest insight into the way that the studios and film developments work and the response to those films. Yeah. So it was definitely interesting. I reached out to Jorge on an article I was working on the Newt treatment of resurrection, because that was all Jorge's concept, and he came up with that concept. He took that to Joss, and they worked on that initial treatment together. So I actually managed to make contact with Jorge just to try and clear up some questions I had. And following that, he was kind enough to come and join us to talk about the film as a whole. And it was interesting. So it was very much appreciated. Shall we shut up and let folk listen to the interview?
Yep, let's do it. On to the interview. So Jorge Saralegui, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us. Before we start to talk Alien, can you tell our audience about yourself? Who is Jorge Saralegui, and what do you do?
I am now doing what I had been doing before my film career. So the film career is the substance in the sandwich, and now I'm back to being the second piece of bread instead of the first piece of bread. I'm a writer. That's what I do. Now I write novels and short stories. And that's what I was doing before I entered the film business.
Nice. And how has that shift been for you, just moving back to writing?
Fantastic. It's what I always saw myself as since I was 9 years old. Okay, with very little reason, but nevertheless I did. So it's always been my self-image. It helped me in my film career. It hurt me in my film career. It did both. I'm not saying being a writer. I'm saying being who I am, which includes being a writer. No, it's it's great to be starting, I guess you might say, or resuming a career, or and just at this point writing whatever I want to write. Without worrying about anything, which is the great thing about writing fiction.
Yeah.
there's a lot less limitations than like, what do you do with Alien 4's ending when the budget can only accommodate so much? Those questions don't come up to
A lot,
me.
a lot more freedom.
Myself.
Did coming at it from coming into the film industry from a prose writing point of view, did it give you a different insight into the productions, into the creative process than like your contemporaries at the studios at the time?
Completely. It was there. This is probably true for a lot of fields. So you guys probably encounter it in other aspects of your life, but in Hollywood, because okay, how do you judge whether a project is going to work out or not? Well, you don't really know, right? Okay, you can extrapolate, you can do things like make sequels, like everyone does now, but this was not so true back then, right? There were sequels, but the business, okay, wasn't built around that. So you're basically projecting, and even though people want to quantify it, it's still a matter of opinion,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, if you're wrong a lot, you're probably going to be out of a job. Okay. If the only job you've ever had is working in the film business, it feels like you're on the edge of an abyss the entire time. So you become very cautious in terms of where you stick your nose out, how far you stick it out, that sort of thing. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's true pretty much at every level of the business. It was even true where I started. I started as a reader, a script reader. That was my job. Which I got. A friend introduced me to a friend who helped me get a job, and I was basically doing it just to supplement my writing. It was a good way
So
to make money on the side.
for the audience that might not know,
Yes.
so that is, you are reading the script, you are picking out what you think would be successful or interesting
Yes.
to produce, and
Yeah.
then passing it on to the next level up to go, here, have a look at this.
Yes. Yes. I guess the job is called story analyst in some places, and but basically, what you're doing is you're the first reader of a script submitted to a studio or a production company.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is you write a page and a half synopsis and about a half page to a page of comments, recommending it or not, and explaining why you feel the way you do. Okay, then the executive reads that. If it looks like crap, which, okay, most things aren't necessarily crap, but they're obviously not something you're ever going to make, they may not even read the script. They'll just take your word for it. They'll go, oh, a story about this, that's mediocre. Okay.
Yeah.
Or they may glance at it or whatever, and they may use your thoughts to then parrot them back to the agent that submitted the material in the first place, right? Okay. So this is where things were different for me. So I'm a reader. Most of the readers did the same thing I just told you, which is they would write very cautious, middle of the road comments. Most are negative because, of course, they're negative, right? Okay, but very careful and very, especially when they like something, they really hedged.
Right.
They felt. I didn't. Now, I didn't for a few reasons. One, my innate personality. I tend to be confident in my opinions. Okay, that just always have been. Okay, then we're talking about, does this story work? And I'm a writer. Now I'm not a screenwriter at this point, but I'm a writer, and I can feel stories. I love stories, so I have a good sense of it. If I'm excited about something, then I can communicate it. I'm also a writer. I can write clearly why I feel the way I feel, and I am a structured enough person that I can talk about it in terms of plot and structure and character and so forth. Okay.
The technicalities of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, I wrote very clear and definitive coverages, script coverages. That's what they're called.
Mhm.
Okay. And okay, now had I sucked, I would have been out immediately because I'm being too opinionated. But they were good. And what happened was, I found out later, is that there'd be an executive meeting, a round table of the executives, and they're talking about the projects that came in. And it got to the point, okay, where they would say, well, okay, I read this, and Jorge says, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like, Jorge, he's a fucking reader. Who cares what a reader says, right? But my opinion, the value of my opinion had risen to that level, which I heard about from the story editor. And of course, all that did is give me more confidence to
Of
keep doing
course.
something. That's how they ended up offering me a job to be a studio executive.
Very
I was going
nice.
to leave and be a story editor someplace else, still really just wanted to be a writer. And in order to keep me at Fox, they offered me a job as a junior executive. And I almost didn't take it because I thought it was going to be too much work and take away from my writing, which it did. But I somehow thought I could wangle it all. And so I almost said no, but said yes and took it.
So after that, you were at 20th Century Fox for a number of years as one of their producers.
Yes. I was there as a reader, and then I was there as an executive. Okay, not a producer.
Okay.
As a studio executive.
So, and let's go into that real quick. Like, as a studio executive, what exactly is your role there? You're just deciding what gets made, what doesn't get made, essentially.
Well, and again, I'm going to try to be concise, semi-concise here. Okay. As you can imagine, this conversation can go well away from Alien and into just this topic, which
right. But
which,
just for those who may be curious, like the difference between like a producer and a studio executive, like what?
Okay. So basically, the basic system is someone writes a script and they submit it to an agent. Their agent, they try to get an agent or maybe a lawyer, or they happen to have a personal connection to a producer. Okay. At that point, the agent or the producer or an agent with a producer as a team submits something to a studio. Okay. That's when it arrives at the studio, a script. It's sent down to the story department, which is where readers like me read it. We put it out. At some point in here, the executive, the vice president, reads it. And if they like it, they then submit it to the group as a whole, headed by a president, and often a chairman is in the room as well. And they decide to buy the script or not. Okay, so they buy the script in our example here. You now start developing it. Okay, you have a deal with a writer to do one or two more drafts. So you work on it. As a rule, you get to a place where it's still not good enough, and you either put it on the shelf or you hire another writer. Okay. So often an unfair thing to do. Often the result of executives not really knowing what to do. Okay. Basically, executives saying, well, I went left and that didn't work, so I'm going to go right. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. Okay. Eventually, the studio says, let's get serious about making this one. Okay, let's start packaging it. Okay, packaging is putting together a director and actor team. So that's where you go, and you find a director first, and then with the director you find actors. In the meantime, okay, you're working on a budget, and when you get the budget to a level where the studio is willing to bite off on it, you make the movie, or you pull the plug at the last minute because you just can't get the budget down low enough.
Interesting. So it seems like the executives are kind of like a council for the studio, essentially deciding who's going to make the movie, as opposed to producers, which is all like raising money and the logistics of the shoot.
Yes. And the producers who really do make them, kind of like executives, are executives.
There's some crossover there.
I'm trying to think of somebody who's a huge producer. Say well, and it's on their own. There aren't that many, but say like Legendary. Okay. And who made like the Godzilla movies and a lot of, right? Okay. They have a deal with Warner Brothers, but they have enough money that they could make things on their own. So they can push, for things. They also co-finance, but that's getting kind of in the weeds. But yes, the other producers are basically they're sort of the equivalent of the executive. They have the same role, kind of. They were there first, because they usually come in with the project, okay, and they work with the writer in tandem with the executive in developing it, right? They're the ones that tend to be on set because, say, I'm an executive. I've got a bunch of projects, right? So I've got to mainly be in my office working on all my other stuff, on new stuff coming in. Occasionally, I'll visit the set, but the producer, in theory, ought to be there every day. Some of them aren't. Some of them never go. Okay, but that's the idea. Okay.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for indulging my curiosity with the distinction. But to get on to our next question, so we have a traditional question on our podcast, and I'm sure every related alien podcast, and that's to ask our guests about their first encounter with the xenomorph. So do you remember the first time you saw the film, H.R. Giger's masterpiece?
Yes, I do. I was living in San Francisco where I was a writer, and I saw it at the North Point Theater, okay, when it came out. I went and saw it right then. And it scared the shit out of me. And I loved it. Loved it. That's it's as simple as that. I loved the movie. Yeah.
So Alien is a franchise that audiences and creatives continually come back to. There may be lulls between projects, but we keep coming back to it. People keep coming back to it, and we've had absolute success with Romulus last year in 2024, and there's a Hulu series on the way this year in 2025, and a sequel to Romulus in development. Alien isn't going anywhere soon. What do you think it is about the Alien series that makes it so enduring?
Well, actually, I would say that the second aspect, which is the less savory one, is the fact that it's a franchise. And these days, this is the unsatisfactory answer that I'm giving you. I'll give you a better one. Okay. But it just occurred to me, well, first of all, it's a franchise, which means a lot more today for some reason than it did 30 years ago.
Yeah, okay. More sequels get made today now than original films.
Yes, and the global audience is bigger, and you get enough people to go, and you can get away with it. I mean, I'm constantly stunned by, like, they made another one of that, you know what I mean? But they do. Okay. So there's that answer. But the real answer, to me, is the pure gleeful evil, of the creature. That's what I think it is. I mean, and for that, you go back to the first one, and you go Geiger and Scott together conjured a certain sadism in a non-human villain. That's really hard to do. If you think about other monsters, if you think about sadism, you might say Dracula maybe does take pleasure in what he does, but then he's a human, he's a former human, right? Okay. But in terms of like a monster that's not human, that whatever, how do you conjure that sense of pleasure that it gets in saying, I am about to kill you, but I'm savoring it and I'm letting you feel miserable for a little bit before I do it. That to me is what's different about the creature, about the xenomorph from anything else.
And I suppose that's mostly evident really in Alien, in the way Scott paces the scenes with the alien, making the kills, and like that whole scene with Brett when we see him for the first time, just how slow and deliberate.
Yes.
Scott shoots it and the creature's performed.
Yes, it's amazing. I just saw them all again. Well, the first four again recently, fairly recently, and I was just amazed at how perfect that movie is.
Have you seen the prequels and Romulus?
No,
No. Okay.
I have not because because I'm a jerk, and I've never seen anything since Alien Resurrection.
Fair enough. And you've spoke in the past about when you took that, that executive job at Fox, and one of the things you were so enthusiastic about pushing forward with was specifically, a new Alien film. So why, obviously, other than the whole effectiveness of Alien as the creature, why did you zone in on Alien? Because I think prior you'd pushed Speed and Independence Day, but then you end up with this sequel here.
Yes, well, Speed was the first movie I shepherded at Fox, and by the time I'd done Independence Day and a couple of others, I was in a place where I could kind of do whatever I wanted to do.
Prove your clout, and then
within reason. I wasn't the head of the studio,
yeah,
but I was sort of like a comet at that particular point. I mean, that was my high point in my career. I'd been a junior executive. I was going to mention this earlier when I was first hired as an executive. I was put on the Alien 3 project.
Okay.
But I wasn't in charge of it. My job was literally to watch the rushes, the dailies every day, and then write a log for the president, like speed ahead to take 4, and then speed ahead to this. So you have to sit there for an hour and do that. That's what I did. And so I saw, all the rushes for that. And in staff meetings, I heard all the complaining about Fincher and how the movie was going and all that kind of stuff. So I had that exposure, okay,
right,
at a distance. But and then Ripley's dead, and as far as the studio's concerned, the project is over. But I loved Alien. It was as simple as that, okay, and I knew that I had some clout at that particular time. And so I came up with an idea that I thought was promising and asked if I could develop it. And they said yes. But it was simply as a fan. It would be like if you guys are doing it, because you want to.
yeah.
I just happened to be in the right place.
Would you say that studios were kind of more focused on trilogies at the time, like, for example, Star Wars or Jaws, but then there came a point where they wanted to push beyond that and build the franchises a bit more?
In this case, I don't think they were thinking that. It was a little pre that kind of consciousness, that meta consciousness. This was, that might work. Try it.
Okay.
We can do one more and see what happens. Okay.
So I know we've talked about this previously while I was working on my editorial about the early days of the film, and you've just alluded to it there. But for completion's sake, I just wanted to touch on it again for the podcast, so it was all here in
Sure.
one place. So when you first started developing Resurrection, you hadn't originally intended to bring Ripley back. It was going to be Newt that you cloned. So
Yes.
Can you tell our audience about those early days of the production and why that direction?
Because Ripley was dead, and the idea of bringing her back didn't occur to me. Like I went with the story the way it was, i.e., she jumped in the vat and that's it, right? Okay. And then I thought, how could you bring it back? How could you continue from here? And I had the idea of cloning Newt and doing something that in retrospect doesn't make a lot of sense, but it did to me at the time, and they bought it, which was because of her survival skills in Aliens. They thought she'd be a useful scout for whatever unit they were going to send to find the aliens in the home planet. And that was my idea. So she is this, and what I liked about a character like her is that being a clone, she's an outcast and viewed as subhuman. So she'd be dealing with those issues while
a bit of drama and conflict and prejudice, and
exactly. And so that was basically my idea. Have her go with an expedition to the home planet.
So you already zoned in on this clone concept straight off the bat. Did Sigourney's sort of distance from the franchise factor into, we go Newt rather than Ripley as well?
Yeah, I mean, no one. Well, first of all, I mean, no one was really talking about it because it'd be kind of like, okay, I sat around and wrote a little, treatment about the whole thing, right? Then I showed it to my boss, the president. He said, "Sounds good, pursue it." Now I'm back to being on my own again. You know what I'm saying? And then I found Joss Whedon, and then we set all that up. And then once we got that going, Sigourney Weaver heard about it. But up until then, we weren't thinking about her. So it wasn't like a decision not to do it. It never occurred to me.
Okay.
A failure of imagination, given that I'm cloning Newt. And so you might say, why didn't I clone her? But it didn't even occur to me.
Right.
I just thought of that story. You know what it is? It's as a writer, I probably just happened to think of that story, and then I fell in love with the story.
Just zoned in on
So
that
then
one.
it's so then it's that story, and since no one was saying no to it, the story just continued until Sigourney said no.
And you don't tell her no, right?
Right, exactly. Well, I found that out. I mean, at that point, I was, into this one enough that it was kind of like, okay, but then I initially didn't want her to be doing it, right? But because I felt that the ship had sailed to some degree, or my ship had sailed, right? Okay, and my ship had wind in its sails, um, uh, but the studio said, well, if she wants to do it, it'd be stupid not to put her in it. And I said, okay, and that was that.
Fair.
And while we're aware of a pitch for an Alien 4 from Stuart Hazeldine around the time Resurrection was starting to be developed, it's not a period we know a lot about. We're pretty big on movie archaeology of unused scripts and pitches around here. So we were wondering if you became aware of any previous attempts at a fourth film locked away in the Fox vault.
I read that question, and the answer is no, I think. Okay, why don't you stir my memory and tell me a little bit about his pitch?
It was called Alien Earthbound. It was kind of a similar thing to what ultimately happened. Well, no, that's a lie to say that. It also featured cloned Ripley, if I remember rightly, in a way.
Yeah.
And the idea was that it was set on this space station that was anchored to the Earth with like an orbital elevator lift, and aliens got loose on the space station, and it was like a race to stop them getting down the lift to Earth, and it involved somehow Ripley's granddaughter or great granddaughter. I can't remember how exactly it worked out.
No, I mean, I guess it's possible that I saw it, but I have no memory of it at all. I was aware because I was there as a junior executive that there were 2 Alien 3 scripts, right? Which you guys know, right? And they married the 2.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, it has the issues that it has.
The Vincent Ward and
right.
Yeah.
Yes. But no, I don't. I don't. I had this weird sense of like I read something from somebody. So maybe I did.
I
Because
think
I'm trying to think there's something, but it might be Alien versus Predators. It might have been that I met that writer, and I had a vague memory of that.
right.
But not really. Because it wasn't okay, but I'll put it this way. If somebody had come to me out of the blue with, say, Stewart's pitch, I would have been
Mm,
interested because it would have been, oh, Alien. Maybe I can push this script through. And that didn't happen.
right. Okay.
You mean, and I'm sure that would click in my mind.
Fair enough. I think it's a curiosity that we'll sort of
Sure.
have as fans, is what they got locked away in that vault, what unsolicited drafts or pitches are held away in there.
Yeah, yeah. Who knows? Because they do have those. Um, I mean, everything I had on my laptop is gone. Because you end up using a different system or something
Yeah.
else. Um, but um, but the things that were given to, well, even say for example, like my treatments, that wouldn't be there because that wouldn't have been submitted. You know what I mean? It's an internal document. But
Right.
Stewart's thing, in theory, would be there.
Okay. So Joss Whedon was, you said in the past, he was the first person you thought of to work with on Resurrection. At the time he was a really hot writer. I think he made a bit of a name for himself with his work on Toy Story and with you on Speed, if I remember rightly. What was it like working with him at the time, and how do you feel about the way he's distanced himself from the film with comments like they filmed it all wrong?
I met Joss back when I was. It's funny. When I was a reader, one of the scripts that I had submitted to me was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Okay, the movie,
The movie, yeah, okay.
and I said that they should make it, and they
Mm,
ended up making it, not because of me directly, whatever. Okay, and then I was the junior executive on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so I saw him a couple of times there, and I met Rutger Hauer, um, but uh, uh, but then at that point, Joss, I guess he worked on Toy Story or whatever, but I didn't know where he'd gone. He'd gone somewhere. I just knew that I really liked the dialogue in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
mm,
That kind of like stylized Valley speak struck me as really inventive. So he was always in the back of my mind. Um, and then he he asked to meet with me one time, and we had lunch. And he said that the truth was that he didn't want to write Toy Story and that kind of stuff. He wanted to write action movies, and he had an idea for a Die Hard on a bridge called Suspension.
mm.
And I told him, okay, sounds good, but if I were you, I wouldn't pitch it because you're the Toy Story guy. I would write the script. Now, first of all, that's always my advice anyway, because I'm a writer and I've written novels. So I'm always thinking, why don't you just fucking write it instead of,
Put your
well, I'm pitching it, and if no one wants it, then I'm not going to write it. Aren't you a writer? Like, what do you do all day?
put your money where your
I
mouth
write
is.
all but anyway,
Yeah.
off the soapbox. I told him to do that, and he did. And he sold it for a ton of money. I mean, it never got made, but it established him as one of those. In the 90s, a lot of action scripts sold for a
Hmm.
lot of money. His was one of them. So he had a name as that. Okay. Um, and then when I was working on Speed and developing it, and we're about to make it, and then we had a crisis on the script at the very end. I brought in another pair of producers, and I recommended, and they asked me, who would you recommend as a writer? And I thought of Joss because he'd written Suspension and because I liked his humor.
Yeah.
They met with Joss and really liked him. Um, and so then he was brought on, did a tremendous job on Speed. And that really made his reputation.
Mm.
Because that movie was huge and everybody loved it. and he got arguably a disproportionate amount of credit for it, but regardless, he got a lot of credit for it. And so he was doing really well, and we were definitely friendly at that point, having had this experience, this happy experience. And so I just asked him, do you like Alien? And I love Alien. So then I said, well, then do you want to do this? He goes, I'd love to do this. And that was it.
Nice. And what about that distance he's put between himself and the film after all this time?
Yeah, I remember the day he saw it for the first time. We saw it together in a screening room with, I forget who else was in there, probably some executives. It wasn't a big room. And he was friendly enough and polite to Jean-Pierre afterwards, but then he told me I was just putting on an act. I really didn't like it, and so forth. So it's his honest opinion. I mean, it's how he felt about it. He didn't like. I mean, it's easy to see how somebody may say, I don't like the Jeunet approach to anything, right? I mean, Jean-Pierre Jeunet is not for everybody. I'll give you an example. I just saw it again, right? And I'm happy to say I loved it more than I thought I was going to. One scene that stuck out to me as, okay, I wouldn't have done that, is when Dan Hedaya is about to get killed and his eyes get cross-eyed or whatever. And like, I thought, okay, that's too goofy for me today. I think that's what Joss means.
Yeah.
In spades. That vibe that is there in lesser degrees elsewhere in the movie, which works in well enough for me, I think really bugged him.
Oh, that's fair. I mean, the film isn't for everybody in a lot of ways. So I can understand that point of view. Yeah.
Me too.
And the promotion leading up to Alien Resurrection was a little before our time, so we're a bit ignorant to it. Whedon made a comment in an interview with Fangoria that one of his drafts was leaked online before the film's release. Is that true?
I don't remember that at all, but if it was, nobody cared, because that would have been 96, the year before it came out, right? And online, so what?
Yeah, not too many online compared to today.
No, there wasn't much online. I remember doing a question and answer thing on Queen of the Damned when I did that in 2002, and I remember how new that was. You know what I mean? Like, internet stuff hadn't caught on that much.
Gotcha. And Resurrection reportedly went through some trouble settling on a director. Danny Boyle was supposedly attached to the film, but dropped due to worries about the level of effects work. Bryan Singer, David Cronenberg, and Peter Jackson were reportedly talked to. You said something interesting in an interview with Starburst about directors not wanting to be compared to Ridley Scott or James Cameron. Since Resurrection, we've seen very vocal fans like Paul W.S. Anderson and Fede Alvarez in the director's chair for other Alien films. Do you think you'd face the same difficulty trying to find a director if Resurrection were made today?
If it were made today, but it would still be the fourth in the series.
I guess.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I would say yes.
Okay.
Yes, we would have trouble. I was thinking about this earlier. The main thing is you're going to be compared to the two successful ones. You don't want to be David Fincher, but then David Fincher was a first-time director. Now you go, how come we didn't go with a first-time director? Well, we did kind of, but the original intent was get a bigger name like Cronenberg. And I don't think we approached Bryan Singer, by the way.
Okay, that's just one of the the things online.
Yeah, I don't think he was. He might have done Usual Suspects by then. I think he probably had, but no, we wouldn't have thought of that. Bryan Singer wouldn't have been that until after X-Men, kind of. I mean, I think. But it was like, yeah, all those people want to, like David Cronenberg. I mean, now, especially if you look back, of course, David Cronenberg didn't do it. You know, he's going to do his things only, right? Okay. But so that I realize, but say someone like Peter Jackson's a good example. Like, why not him? And I think, yeah, I think it's not wanting to be compared to those people. Now, Danny Boyle is willing to do it, but Danny Boyle hadn't, well, actually, Peter Jackson hadn't done those either.
He done the Frighteners at that. Is it the Frighteners? Peter
Yeah,
Jackson did?
yeah, he done that. But I'm thinking, what I'm saying is, it's not like, okay, Peter Jackson, yeah, I mean, you're not. If someone compares you to Ridley Scott and you come out somewhat in the short end at this point in your career, that's okay. You know what I mean? Because you're not that big. It comes to what I would have said, were I speaking so frankly to him, right? But no, that was the response that we were getting, that the shadow of the first two, and probably the lack of success of the third one. You're bucking that as well. Keep that in mind. That I hadn't thought of that. That's also is going to hold somebody back. This is a franchise on the downslide, unless they happen to have been somebody who really loved the series. Now, somebody who I proposed, and also Winona Ryder, jumping ahead a little bit, was Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, okay.
I was very close to him at the time.
That would have been very interesting.
And the studio didn't want to take the chance.
What was he known for at that point?
Kronos.
Right.
So you're taking a chance. But yes. And that would have been interesting, because it would have been expensive. Although it's expensive with Jean-Pierre, but Guillermo doesn't cut corners. No. So it would have been expensive. But I think it would have been great.
Oh, undoubtedly.
Yeah. And he wanted to do it.
Do you remember what got in the way of?
Just his lack of a track record. It was too big of a gamble.
Okay.
Too big of a gamble given the money.
So that was the rest of the council, so to speak.
Yes. Now, and when you compare him, obviously not now, but you compare him then to Jean-Pierre Jeunet, you go, well, that's a pretty oddball thing. Absolutely. But he'd made two polished, finished films. Guillermo hadn't.
Yeah.
So there is that.
I'm kind of disappointed we never got to see Danny Boyle do one, because I think he would have been a perfect fit for Alien.
Yes. He didn't do it. He didn't do it partly for the reason you said, because of the, he found out in effect just how cumbersome and meticulous the process can often be when you're having effects, right? Something that a guy like Jean-Pierre loves, doesn't care. Okay. And Guillermo, probably the same thing. Okay. Danny is more, as you can almost tell from his stuff, he's more freeform. Okay. But it combined with the fact, I forget what had just come out. I'm not sure I don't think it was The Beach, or maybe it was Train Spotting, but whatever it was.
I think it was Train Spotting first and then The Beach.
All of a sudden, he was bigger. Like, we're using him, having perhaps seen Train Spotting or not, but basically off his first movie. So it was a combination of like, oh, wait a minute, now I have more options, which he did, combined with, and this is probably going to be a pain in the ass. So he ended up backing out and was very apologetic. He's a very nice guy, and was very nice about that whole thing.
Did you ever see Sunshine? His answer to Alien, I guess.
It's in space, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's where they go flying to the sun.
Yeah, I saw it, but I don't have a strong memory of it. I did see it.
Yeah, I remember enjoying that one, though I did think it fell apart a little bit at the end when he tried to go too Alien without the alien.
Oh yeah. It's ringing a bell. Yeah, I think I ended up being critical of it.
Fair enough.
I'm pretty critical in general.
You sound like a fan.
Yeah, exactly.
And back in the 90s, you contributed to a profile on Winona Ryder and really highlighted how dedicated she was to the production and in helping you actually find Jean-Pierre Jeunet. Can you tell our audience a little about your experience working with Winona?
Yeah, because we had by then Sigourney wanted to be in the movie. So then we had switched over to a treatment and then a script that is what the movie ended up being, right? Okay. So when when you read the script, it, you would think that the call character was the star of the movie. Now, Ripley's Ripley, right? So she has a certain gravitational pull, right? Okay, just inherently. But she has a lot less dialogue, or she did in the script, and wasn't as central to what they would do. Call for a long time, especially in the script, because in the movie it didn't feel the way when I see it now. Was the leader? She became the leader of the group. Okay, so that's what Winona was going to be playing. Okay, and we thought of her because she was perfect for it. It seemed like, right? She's perfect in that she's a rising star who who loves the idea of Alien and wants to do Alien, right? Okay, so we had her, and felt very lucky that we did. Okay, she was 24 at the time,
Didn't realize she
and
was so young.
yeah, exactly. She's young, and I remember just being super impressed by her as a person,
Mm.
especially keeping in mind that she's 24, right? I didn't know she was 24 until her birthday she was 25, right? Um, uh, um, she would come into my office. I mean, not just drift in because you don't do that, but you know what I'm saying. But she would schedule meetings once every week or two to go over like director lists and talk about what we could do and what could she and like that. And that's where we discussed like Guillermo. You know what I mean? I mean, we started with Cronenberg and da 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 da, and then how about Guillermo, and then at some point Jean-Pierre, she liked the idea, um, and and I'd love those two movies of his.
I love
Um,
City of Lost Children. I think it's
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah.
And the other was Delicatessen, right?
Yes, yes. I'd seen them both on my own as a civilian, and loved them. And of course, you never think you're ever going to work with someone like that, an oddball French director. You're just glad he exists, right?
Mm.
Okay. Uh, and then, um, yeah. But anyways, so that's what Winona was doing during that time, and then it's funny because Danny Boyle's agent, whose name is Robert Newman,
Mm.
he was Jean-Pierre's agent at the time,
Okay.
and he and I were friends. Aside from any of this, right? It's probably how Danny Boyle got involved, is that connection. But
Right.
okay, so so one day he calls me. He goes, how about Jean-Pierre Jeunet? Or rather, I tell him, and he goes, "Yeah," and then and then he goes, "I mean, do you think I can get away with this? I cost you your director, and I'm going to get my obscure French guy in the movie, you know?" Um, and then and then and then we're talking about the idea, and then he tells me that Jean-Pierre loves the idea of the movie, but you have to understand that he doesn't know any English.
Mm.
Okay. Now, this is back then, a studio movie with a guy who, having made those two movies, isn't necessarily who you would think of, except in a left field kind of way. Then you say, he doesn't know English? Like, what? Right? Kind of thing, right? And then, and then Robert told me, listen, right now in your career, okay, you can get away with fucking up on this, which is true. But also, it was a certain cockiness at that point, I would say, because everything was going right for me right then at that point. So I felt kind of like, yeah, so he doesn't know English, so we'll work it out. So it'll all be okay, which it was, by the way. That wasn't the problem. Um, but it was harder than I thought, the whole process.
Dealing with an interpreter and translating the
He was an
vision.
interpreter because he is, as you might imagine from somebody who's into such meticulous stuff, he's very precise in how he talks. So he was learning English the whole time, but refused to speak in English. He used an interpreter the entire time. And then when we're in post-production and I visited him in the editing room, we're just talking in English. And he'd learned it. But he wouldn't use it in the movie because he wanted to make sure that it came out exactly right, except with Sigourney, who knew French.
Oh, I didn't know she. So that they would talk, they would direct in French.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they would.
That's awesome. No, I didn't. That's a tidbit I've not heard before.
Yeah.
So, in regards to Jeunet, there is a little question I was hoping you could clear up for us. And, at the time, Jeunet was well known for his partnership with Mark Caro. And there seems to be a little uncertainty around whether he was also offered Resurrection alongside Jeunet and just turned it down. Do you remember how that partnership, how that fellowship factored into the early talks with him?
It's kind of in the same kind of like casual way where somebody tells you and you go, okay. Okay, so when we think of Jean-Pierre Jeunet, at the time, I think of Jeunet and Caro, right? I think of the two guys who made the two movies that I like. And then I speak to Robert, the agent, and he tells me, well, actually, they aren't together anymore, but Jean-Pierre is really the director, which he was. Caro was more the creature guy, the effects guy. And by the way, they're very good friends now, and were then. I didn't know that, but I just found out in my recent contact with Jean-Pierre. Mark Caro wasn't particularly. He wouldn't have been. He wasn't. In fact, Jean-Pierre probably would have. I think he may even have. Unbeknownst to me, they did talk about Alien and the creature and that kind of stuff. I didn't even know about it. So they were friends even then, but they'd gone different paths.
Yeah, I think Jeunet had him do some costume concepts for Resurrection, which I think Bob Rigwood got a bit miffed that Caro got the credit for the costume work. So it was, Jeunet did still bring him on in some capacity, but yeah, it was the question as to that co-chair.
Right.
That was always a bit of a confusion.
He wasn't there, but I think it was one of those things that their careers just went in different directions. And they stayed being friends. And Caro never came out, or he never came out and visited the set. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. So something we're particularly interested to hear your point of view on as a studio exec is on H.R. Giger's legacy with the Alien franchise. His design, his style is a large part of the enduring cultural impact of the Alien and of the series itself. Resurrection was in a lot of ways the start of a departure from his aesthetic. It had story reasons for that change, but money-saving efforts with the subsequent films, AVP and AVP Requiem, led to those molds being reused, and then Ridley Scott's prequels took a real step back when they should have been arguably really embracing Giger's style. We had heard rumblings from the art team on the second prequel film on Alien Covenant that conflicts with Giger's estate caused issues with them revisiting his biomech styles for the film. How realistic of an issue do you view that as? And as an exec, how do you feel about the franchise's debt to Giger? And did that factor into Resurrection at all?
Okay, I'll answer that last short question first about the debt.
Okay,
that's huge. Without Giger, and in fairness, I guess, without Ridley Scott appreciating Giger, right, and therefore using him, right? Okay, but essentially on a creative level, because you can say at that point Scott is working on a creative / executive level, but Giger's vision is, one of those things that as a writer, as a creative person, is what you dream of. Okay. Something where you have a transcendent moment, a transcendent vision. Okay. Now the thing about Giger is that, yeah, except that wasn't really transcendent within the body of his work. A lot of it's like that. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of it is just this unique vision. I remember, I didn't know it was him at the time, but do you guys know? I'm sure you know this, that the cover of Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Brain Salad Surgery, that album, that's a Giger
Yeah.
image. Okay, which I didn't know, but at the time, okay, when I bought the album, I loved that. In fact, I did something with it. I had something about that image because I thought it was so cool. Um, uh, anyway, so no, I think that Alien would never have worked the way that it did if the creature didn't look the way that it did. There's no way. And then Scott did everything right with it, but he had genius in his hands.
Yeah, undoubtedly there.
Yeah. So there's a huge debt. I would, maybe you can tell me if I'm missing something, but when you said that Resurrection is the one that veered off, isn't Alien 3 where it veered off?
You see, the people tend to put that to ADI, and they go, actually, we were closer in color palette and some of the shapes, and ADI don't agree with that assessment.
Okay, because I'm just thinking when you say Alien, you mean, for example, I don't think Alien and Aliens look very much alike.
Yeah, and there was that letter where Giger expressed disappointment in not being involved with the second film, and then in the third film, he was officially involved to a point where I don't think he, as an artist, was really working at the pace that the studio wanted, and Studio ADI just kind of ran away with it. So yeah, I guess you could argue that really since the first film, it's always been kind of he's not involved. Oh, maybe he is, and then he's not. And then in Prometheus, we kind of return again where he's doing a few sketches for Scott, but not really doing much of the significant conceptual work for the film.
Right. The dog, or whatever it was, it's a dog, right? In Alien 3?
Dog or an ox.
I mean, that's where it changed, right? How can you talk about Alien Resurrection after the dog? Forget it. All bets are off at that point. I would think, in terms of breaking the mold. But when you're saying, okay, like what were we thinking when we were making the movie, right? Now, again, in this kind of short-sightedness that you saw me express when you asked me, well, what did you think of bringing back Ripley? I go, no, it just didn't occur to me. No one mentioned Giger that I recall. Like, it didn't come up. You're working, okay, with these guys who are going to make the creatures, and we drew them up, and they basically looked, the basic aliens looked like the original aliens, didn't it? Or not? You guys would know better than me.
There's some major changes, I suppose, in the texturing, in the detailing, the shape of the head.
Okay.
Stuff like that. And the palette, of course.
Okay. I wouldn't have, if it was me, I wouldn't have changed anything from the first one. Because why? It's all aesthetics, right? And you're kidding yourself. You're gilding a lily trying to change the first one, because it's so perfect, so insane and perfect, right? Now, of course, it's different. Like when you get to the baby in ours, because by definition, that's going to be what it's going to be. It's part Sigourney and all that.
The newborn.
Pardon?
The newborn.
Yeah.
But I suppose the thing is, Alien 3, Resurrection, they do have narrative reasons for a change in approach, I suppose. And I guess from a creative point of view as well, there's this. It seems to be like a desire to put the stamp on it.
You're probably right. I mean, I had a huge deal when I worked on Queen of the Damned, which was mostly the vampire Lestat married with it. With the fans, it was huge because we were, literally doing this to Anne Rice's stuff. So I won't get into that, but I'm saying, yes, there's a certain, it's both a combination of wanting to put your stamp on it, which would not be me. That would be more a director and their visual sense, right?
Yeah.
Combined with a kind of ruthlessness, which would definitely include me, towards, well, the story has to work. And it has to work within these confines, which as a rule means financial. Okay. And well, if we can't do it, we can't do it. I mean, you might fight for it, but if you lose, then you lost. Right. Okay. And so, okay, like Fincher, especially in hindsight, and given that he was the same guy that he is now, you go, of course he was putting a stamp on it. The guy puts a stamp on everything, right? That's who he is, and good for him, right? Jean-Pierre, I'm sure, did want to put a stamp on it. I mean, he was gonna his original shot about the bug, it was gonna be even more exaggerated than it is now. That was gonna be a complete Jean-Pierre Jeunet crazy style opening.
Yeah.
So in that sense, yeah, he was doing that, and to some degree, that's what you're hiring people like that to do, right? Okay, let's put it this way. Okay, what if we brought in David Cronenberg, which I'm sure we all would die to see a David Cronenberg Alien, right? Okay, do you think that one would look like anybody else's? I really doubt it. Right? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's what happens. I wouldn't have changed the Alien because to me it's perfect. If you have a new creature, whether it's justified, like the one that dies at the end of Alien Resurrection, or whether it's the dog creature in Alien 3, that to me is a problem. They're different, and the stories require them to vary to varying degrees.
And to bring those designs to life, the wonderful gents at ADI, of course, returned following Alien 3 to work on Resurrection. According to an interview with Alec Gillis, he was told they were the only practical effects studio that was considered for the film. And you sent us that awesome photo posing next to one of ADI's eggs from the film. So do you own that? Can you tell us about working with ADI for Resurrection?
Yeah, I can tell you some, but not a lot, because the way the studios are broken up. Okay, I'm in production, right? Okay, but really it's creative development, right? Then there's something called physical production, which is who are executives who join the team, who join my team when a movie's being made. They're the ones that work with the line producer on the set, and they're the ones who are more nuts and boltsy. They're the ones who do a script. I mean, not script, but a budget. Okay, for the studio. Then there's the post-production people at Fox who work with the filmmakers on the special effects. So they're all separate. So while I'm in charge, right? Okay, kind of supervising all of that, they were over there doing whatever they were doing. I didn't have much to do with it. Those guys were very nice. Alec and Tom were very, very nice guys. Apart from making me that egg, but see, now there's an example of, like, do I have any memory of why nobody else has approached? Zero.
Right.
And it wouldn't surprise me if it was like the first stop, which makes sense. based on Alien 3, they probably had a good enough experience with them on Alien 3. They probably felt, well, at least those guys weren't a problem, you know. And then they said that they could be reasonable in how they could make it, is my guess. I recall that CG at that point, it's not like it is now. It was still really expensive, which is one of the reasons why we couldn't do the ending that we wanted. But I recall like them showing me that one of the hard things about CG work at the time was when you have an alien walking, making it have weight when it hits the ground, which now seems natural, but back then it was very hard to do. So a lot more money went into that kind of stuff. But no, I mean, all I recall was that the guys they were always there. They were very professional, very cooperative. They knew how to work with the system.
So it doesn't always, it's not always a bidding process then. It isn't shopping the work out to the shops all the time. If you've got an existing relationship, if you've got a good relationship, previous experience to be like, do you want to do this?
You probably would, and you probably have no reason not to. In fact, you're not going to. It'd probably be more like, let's just say that it's Ridley Scott making Covenant or whatever, right? Okay. And Fox says, well, so let's use ADI. And then he goes, no, I want to use somebody else. Okay. Now you have a conversation, or you just give away to Ridley Scott. You know what I'm saying? But it has to be, it's like that. The studios usually, the only way that it wouldn't work out is if these guys, Alec and Tom, had said, well, it's going to cost this much. And we go, well, we can't pay that. They go, well, that's what it costs. Then we go out and shop it someplace else.
Okay. With it.
Alien Resurrection easily contains some of Sigourney Weaver's best work in the series, and a particularly interesting take on Ripley. You've always been very positive about Sigourney's work on the film, so can you tell our audience about your experience working with her on Resurrection?
Yes. First, I can say, I've said this more than once, but somebody as accomplished as she is inherently as an actress, and who has already played Ripley 3 times, could have sleepwalked through this movie and done a good job. It wouldn't have been hard at all for her to be good in this movie without, doing much more than showing up the way a lot of actors, in my experience, do. They come in, they do their work. You can tell they don't really care. Not that they hate it, but it's just a day's work. Okay. She was very into it from the very beginning. I remember talking to her at the very beginning when about the sexuality of Ripley in this thing. And part of it was that Jean-Pierre wasn't interested in talking about that with her. So she felt a little, for whatever reason. Okay. So she was a little stunted there and talked to me, and I inherently related to it. I knew what she meant. You have that kind of aggressive genes in your system, it might come out sexually. And not that you're going to have sex, but there's going to be something about you that's very physical and ravenous in a way that could border on the sexual. You play that, and you're going to get a very distinct, weird character. And that's what we spoke about quite a bit. And that's what she did. I mean, a lot of scenes do that, but the most obvious one is the one where she's talking to Winona in the room at the very. I think it's the first and second time that they meet and they're talking, and she's like running her hands around her face and being completely weird. And there's something sexual and ravenous and dangerous about that scene that all kind of blurs together. And that kind of stuff, if you think about it, that's an alien movie. Like, what is that doing in an alien movie? And yet it works. It works on a character level, right? But that's the good thing about Sigourney. It's also the good thing about the script, giving the opportunity to do something like that. Anyway, so she did all that kind of stuff. But she was always there, always pushing. And then the only other, I mean, this is just a funny tidbit that I'm not sure if I told you, Aaron, before or not, but one day my office was near the set because the way this was the first movie, by the way, made at Fox on the lot since Hello, Dolly.
Okay.
In the 60s, because TV has all the stages, but we got a stage, built the pool under it, and okay, and so it was all there. So it was good, and we'll get to the producers in a minute. I know on your questions, but so I'd be across the way in my office, but I'd come down and visit periodically, right? As a de facto producer, right? But it was all running smoothly enough. And they could just call me if anything was wrong. So one day I'm there, walking around, and it's kind of like walking through a submarine, right? Walking through a spaceship. It's all those corridors. So I go down a corridor and I turn. I'm sort of like in a junction or something or other. I can't, whatever it is. And I hear Sigourney go, "Hi, Jorge." And so I didn't see her. I turn, and it's her in the clone number 8. The creature that says "kill me."
Oh, no, number 7, yeah, on the table.
Number 7. Oh yeah, number 8 is the one that lives. Yes, yeah. Number seven, which is that was my only contribution to the final film. Actually, is that scene.
Okay, the entire clone scene.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, including her saying "kill me." That whole
yeah.
thing.
Anyway, arguably one of the best scenes in the film and the franchise.
I'm very proud of it. And Joss loved it. And he put it in there and whatever. He's always very complimentary about it. But yeah, it is a really good scene because it's drama, the same way the other one with Winona is. Anyway, I turn. Okay, now she looks horrific in number 7, right? So you can imagine if you haven't seen it. All you've seen is storyboards, which are like nothing, right? And all of a sudden there you are, and you go like this, and there's this hideous creature right there talking to you. It was like, whoa! It scared the shit out of me.
That it can have that kind of visceral reaction when it's not, it's not lit or framed properly as well.
Right.
When
right.
you can see all the construction around you. That's amazing.
Yes. And sorry, because it was so hideous. And then of course, we started laughing, and we, had a regular conversation with her in that box with her head sticking out.
With all the blokes around her.
Yeah. Oh yes, no, it was, yeah.
That's brilliant. And so, so talk about Ripley, talk about Sigourney. Though you didn't originally conceive of the film having Ripley involved, the other execs at Fox wanted her back, and she wanted to come back. For many among the fandom, the reliance that the franchise has come to have on the name Ripley, with the expanded universe recently really overusing her daughter following the success of the video game Alien Isolation, we in the fandom consider it something of a hindrance now. Sigourney Weaver has also spoke words to a similar effect. How do you feel on that reliance? As a creative, as a somebody with executive experience, when do you call it quits?
when do you call it quits? Yeah. Or what is this? And by you call it quits. Okay, you mean whoever happens to be in charge. Yeah. You don't mean Sigourney, right? Okay. It's okay. Like for example, as of number 4, I was ready to call it quits. And if it had worked, that would have been it.
Okay.
There would have been no more Ripley, right? Okay. But there was, for the typical reasons, which is one of the, later on, if we get into the mythology of the story more. The difficulty of having a true mythology when you're dealing with financial constraints and interpersonal stuff like this and so forth that ends up affecting everything, right? Okay. A lot more than a fan wants to believe, a lot more than I want to believe, like the alien home planet. What's that? You know what I mean? What should it be? Okay, what's the mythology? But anyway, regardless, so here's Ripley. She was such an amazing character, including, I think, in Resurrection. I love that version of Ripley. That it's kind of like she's become stamped onto the series, right? Now you can counter that and say, yeah, but wait a minute. In all the Alien versus Predator, she's not there. She's not there in the 2 Ridley Scott prequels or sequels, or whatever they are. Those two. So, but like you're saying, okay, like her daughter is around, and to me, it's kind of like, well, why not have it be Ripley's daughter? I wouldn't worry so much about who the human characters are so much. I mean, I'm interested, but to me, it's really more about, are you making the alien interesting, or are you knocking it off to the side? That was my fear about Alien versus Predator, was really that you're diminishing the centrality of the alien. Okay. And to that degree, Ripley diminishes the alien, or at least shares the screen with the alien, right? And so to that degree, I think it's harmful to the series because it takes away from the danger of the creature. The more it becomes like the villain that's over there, then it's going to get disposed of, as opposed to it being the stuff of nightmares.
Yeah.
Which is what it can be, I think, at its best. I don't know if you can still, I don't even know if now it's even possible to do that.
People seem to have that reaction with Romulus, given that was one thing that was really praised about the movie, is just how well they treated the xenomorph in terms of its design and depiction, and making it kind of scary again.
Mm-hmm. I'll probably see that one, by the way. I didn't see it because I was thinking, I want to see stuff that enhances my sense of the alien. In other words, I want to see something as an elitist super fan. Do you know what I mean? So, for example, like Ridley Scott is going to take you back to the original planet and tell you what really went on. I hear that and I go, that sounds promising. Okay. Even though I was a little bit kind of like when he said, because I'm the guy who came up with the whole thing, and it's kind of like, well, no, you're not the guy who came up with the whole thing. You're the guy that directed it and showed up and has your name on it, but you're not the guy. But that's okay. If you have an idea now, go ahead. But then I read enough reviews that said there's nothing there. There's I mean, there's details there, but there's nothing major for me to hang my hat on it in terms of what happened. You mean how it all started, in a real kind of way? Is that fair enough?
Yeah, I mean, Scott gets a lot of credit, but I think a lot of us see the first Alien as a perfect storm, really, of the people that were involved. And I know you were saying earlier that maybe some directors were nervous in following in Scott and Cameron, but when Scott did come back and did his prequel films, they were really respected and really impressive looking, but they were quite divisive among fans. So I think maybe following Romulus now, we're kind of in a new era with Alien, where more directors would perhaps want to get involved.
Yes. Isn't Romulus, roughly speaking, a remake of the first one?
I wouldn't say so. Honestly, I would not. Honestly, I would say Scott's prequels both are closer to being
structurally,
remakes of the first film.
Very similar to the first film.
Interesting.
Romulus is getting flack because it's And personally, I think this is a crime, and I think it's one of the things I hate about modern sequels. I love Romulus, I'll just preface it, but this is the element of it that I don't like, and that's it reuses dialogue.
Oh,
from the
yeah.
previous films.
Callbacks.
Yes.
Callbacks.
Yeah. Callbacks.
And there's some scenes that are flips and takes on scenes from the previous film. So like the sentry gun scene from Aliens, there's a similar scene in Romulus, but with its own twist. So it does things like that. I mean, there's even some similarity with Resurrection, but that was entirely coincidental, apparently. I won't go anymore. I won't spoil it for you.
Okay.
But yeah, it's getting flack for that and being accused of being a remake for those kind of things. And I don't agree with them personally, because story-wise, structurally wise, it's entirely different to Alien.
Okay. I'll see it. And stop being an asshole, and I'll see it.
Drop me an email afterwards. I'll be curious
I will.
To hear your thoughts on that one.
And something we were curious about was how much, if any, collaboration the production had with the producers of Brandywine. It always seemed to us as if it was none, but they had mentioned being sent early drafts of the script.
Yeah, well, that's true, but it's still none. They're the producers. I assume their names. I haven't seen these last 4 movies, but I assume their names are also there on the screen. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. That's because they'll be there forever. Okay. Geiler's dead, and his name is, I assume, still there, right? Okay. They apparently had been uninvolved enough in Alien 3. Now, this is kind of like my inference, right? Uninvolved enough that when we were developing Alien Resurrection, nobody ever told me to contact them. And I'm the kind of person that I'm the kind of person who never sees anybody. And I just do things on my own. Great. I'd rather just do it myself. So good. No one's telling me to do, it's so perfect. It's my alien, right? Okay.
They were actually sorry, just to interrupt you there. They were actually very friggin' involved in Alien 3. Like the whole the final script they were cobbling together.
They were
They took over as writers and producers.
Okay. You know what it might be then in that case? Because again, I really don't know, and you do. It might be that the studio, it's the whole thing of like the stink of a defeat. You know what I mean? Okay, the movie didn't work. It didn't make money. It killed the franchise at the end or whatever. And then you blame everybody. You blame Fincher and you blame those guys, and you blame everybody for making that movie, where the reality is you probably shouldn't have made it. I mean, the movie wasn't ready to be made. You didn't have a cohesive script, which I can say now, having seen the movie just recently, I thought there's a lot of good stuff in that movie and it's interesting. But what kills it for me is certain incomprehensible plot points, that just for me, it's kind of like, okay, fuck you. You know what I mean? I'm not going to put up with you just jamming something in there because you couldn't make the story work or whatever, or asking me to buy this because you didn't know how to stitch it together or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, rant over. So these guys, so Brandywine. So anyway, so then we're finally going to start making the movie, right? And so forth. And so then somebody tells me, hey, you better go have a meeting with those guys, right? And so, okay. And so they all come into my office. I forget how many of them.
There's 3 of us,
right? Yeah. And they were all, nice guys, not particularly chatty, but not standoffish, just kind of, pleasant, kind of sitting there. And I told them what was going on, and and they were all very kind of like, that sounds good. Okay, like very like that. I did not say, so how involved do you guys want to be, or anything like that. I didn't get near that. And they didn't get near it. and that was it. I never heard from them again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no contractual obligations for them to actually.
Apparently not. Oh, no, there wouldn't be. You mean like as far as being there or something like that? No.
Yeah.
If you'd wanted to be there, then that would have been fine. Then they would have had that right to be on the set.
Okay.
Yeah. And we probably wouldn't have cared.
Movie making is a wild business, isn't it?
Totally. That's where you get into the. I mean, I think back what if we'd made the Newt movie and where I wanted it to go, and I don't think it ever would have been everything I wanted it to be, in the sense that I had the fans' point of view of I want to go back to the alien planet. I want to get to the source. I want to see things. I want to know how it all started and all that kind of stuff. And the more I've thought about the creature, the more I've thought there's probably not a good answer.
That's the problem that I think Scott's faced with his prequels and the responses to those films.
Yeah. I'm a better writer now than I was, 25 years ago, whatever, 30 years ago.
Nearly hitting that point.
It hit me at some point. I said, it doesn't quite square. The creature did not create itself, probably, although it could have. If somebody made it, then it's sort of a Frankenstein's monster story, which is okay.
Which is the way it's actually kind of gone.
That's the way it's gone, and that's what it is. But then it kind of, okay, so that's it. Somebody built this bioweapon and it got out of hand. Right? Okay. End of story. That's an explanation, but it doesn't feel mythic to me.
Yeah, that's
Right?
something I think a lot of Alien fans lament, is the feeling, like the Lovecraftian kind of element. The mystery was part of the fun with Alien.
totally
And
agree.
the more you delve into that, the more you kind of, it's never going to be as fascinating as just imagining about that stuff. That's like the eternal question. And honestly, for the Alien stories, it's just not as important, I think.
No, I think you're right. Like every time I see the first movie and you see that ship and the engineer, the guy, right? Like the guy in the right, it just sparks your imagination and you go, oh, what's their story, right? But then you realize, well, whatever their story is, it actually has nothing to do with the alien, other than that they cross paths or that they built it and it got out of hand. But otherwise, their story is something else, and they're just these advanced aliens. Do you know what I mean? And yet it feels very mythic in the movie, thanks to the filmmaking. But then you realize when they wrote it, they were writing a monster movie in space, right? A horror movie monster movie, horror movie in space, and they came across Giger, but to some degree, it's all cobbled together. I mean, when you look at what Dan O'Bannon wrote otherwise in his short career, but still nothing mythic, that I think we got really lucky with the first one.
It is very much a perfect storm of talented collaboration. Giger elevates the alien aspects of it. When you talk about going to the alien world, or we think about the prequels, I'm disappointed because it's not Giger's painting on the screen in front of me. It's not that landscape of biomechanical elements, all those fucking dicks in a row in one of his screenshots. Not screenshots, his paintings. But then you have Ron Cobb coming in and Roger Christensen and translating the human side into this unusual look for the time. Perfect storm of talent that the rest has struggled to reach. I mean, Cameron kind of, he's an author himself. He's got all this talent. He can envision the look and the world and the writing and the characters. He's what Scott kind of lacks a little bit with his story and his writing, I think.
Yeah.
But
it's funny. I saw the four of them in a row recently. Now, when I first saw them, I don't even remember seeing Alien 3 because I know I saw it at the studio, probably in fits and starts. So I have no memory of it at the theater, even though I know I went. And then, of course, I know my movie, but I remember very clearly the first two at the theater, seeing them as a fan, right, and loving both. And then I saw them again now, and I saw them because of an article in the New York Times based on the anniversary or whatever it is. It was an article, kind of like a reevaluation this last fall, um, of all the movies, and whoever it was that did it ranked the first one first, and it ranked Resurrection and 3 as number 2, and then it ranked Aliens fairly low.
Ooh.
And I remember going, "Oh, that's weird. I wonder why." I wonder why. And then I watched it, and I didn't like it.
How come?
It was such a totally unexpected, and it I would say that for me it lacked a cohesiveness. You can say that the Ripley Newt stuff is the emotional core of it, and it's good, right? But the aliens really are like zombies. He's just throwing bodies at you. Okay. And that, if you think about the first movie and then now these are the aliens, they lost, I wasn't terrified watching this movie. And a lot of the scenes with the Marines are very 80s. It feels like an 80s movie. The fact that they all have quips, every single typical James Cameron quips constantly. I mean, and some are good, like Game Over, man. I still laugh when I hear that one, right? Okay, but like at the end when it's kind of like whatever, like you were always an asshole, and then she pulls the pin on the thing. It's kind of like, okay, I mean, I love sacrifice scenes like that one, but it all seemed bits and pieces for me, kind of like, there's the alien action scenes as opposed to alien horror action scenes. Okay. um all those guys I didn't particularly enjoy. And then I've always thought this, but it really struck me this time how Cameron's double ending is literally like the gargantuan version of Scott's. There's the ticking clock. Okay, we got to get out. We're getting out. Oh, wait a minute. I got to go back and get the cat, or I got to go back and get Newt. I barely get out. I get out. The alien is on board the ship. Oh my God, what do? I blast it out. I mean, it's weird in a way that the last however many minutes, that is 20 minutes or whatever it is the same thing, that you wouldn't just change it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And that is a criticism that's been levied at it for a long time as well.
Okay.
It's structurally very similar to the original.
Yeah, and I mean, it could be, it could really also be being older, and not it. I mean, I still like action, but I like more inventive action. It was just guns. In fact, that was also one of the problems that Joss mentioned as far as building the story, like when it comes to Earth, and we spoke about it spreading all everywhere, kind of thing, right? And then we spoke about, but the problem is that they're easy to kill. Aliens, that's another problem with them, right? And that's one of the things that Cameron actually shows you, how easy they are to kill. He cheat here and there with the acid blood in order to not totally make a mess of things, right? But they're so easy to kill that it becomes like, like Assault on Precinct 13. And that's Nano Bannon, isn't it? Do you know that movie?
Yeah, I know which one you mean. I can't remember who wrote it. No, wasn't it John Carpenter?
Yeah, John
Yeah.
Carpenter. That
Oh,
was
he
it.
wrote it. Yeah,
think
he
so.
wrote it. He wrote it. I think he did write it. Yeah. O'Bannon wrote Dark Star.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think he
before
directed.
Alien.
Right.
Didn't O'Bannon direct Dark? Oh no, that was Carpenter. Carpenter.
That was
also directed.
Carpenter.
That was
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
one. Yeah, USC. But yeah, them just coming at them anyway. I that's all. That's my little. I was just surprised that I didn't. It wasn't like I had a bad time watching it, but I went, oh man, I don't like this anywhere near as much. It's not as interesting. I found Alien 3 more interesting, even though it was infuriating. And then I loved the I loved everything about Resurrection that I had wanted it to have. To me, the most interesting part about the movie was the relationship between a clone and an android, and the two of them being more human than humans. That was the core of the story. That was the core of my original story, and that was the core of the one that Joss wrote, right?
Yeah.
And then you add to that Sigourney. I mean, for me, I'm not sure how you guys felt about this, but do you feel emotion in that scene when the creature can be sucked out the window and Sigourney's looking at it, her offspring?
Yeah, because you're feeling Ripley's pain
Yeah,
at the I guess betrayal as well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I felt sorry for the creature, because it's a baby. It's it doesn't. Yes, it's too dangerous to live, but that's not its fault. You know what I mean? And it hadn't done anything too horrific yet either, right? You know what I mean? Anyway, I just remember watching the movie and just feeling how emotional that scene was this time around, seeing it this fall, as opposed to back then, when I thought it was a good movie in general. But this time, I really liked the the humanism in the story, which of all people Jean-Pierre Jeunet had, even though he's got an anomaly and stuff, but still.
Yeah, and that creature, the newborn, I mean, it's easily the most controversial element of Resurrection, I would say, historically.
Yes.
But it's also the film's most significant contribution to the Alien lore, and it's an undeniably amazing technical feat from the team at Studio ADI.
Yeah.
Sigourney and Jeunet talked about really wanting to disturb the executives at Fox with the newborn. So beyond just that scene of its death at the end, like, how did you feel about the creature in general?
Fine. I mean, I read that when you guys said that, and it's kind of like, I'm sure that conversation happened, but that sort of thing, I guess it probably does happen sometimes, but not as often as you'd think, because again, and you may have gotten this the drift in this overall conversation. A lot of that stuff is kind of like, yeah, whatever. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the studio finding it controversial. No, they knew it wasn't going to look like the alien, or it could look like the alien, but you figured you're going to go someplace different. And it's a monster. And most of them don't care. I cared, but most of them are just executives. That, you know what I mean? So it's like, oh, so Jean-Pierre and the monster guys came up with this monster. It's pretty ugly. Okay, good. You know what I mean? Nobody cared. I mean, they didn't care. And how did I feel? I felt on based on the drawings, right? That it made sense. It was a viable combination of Sigourney and the and the alien. So it was fine. There was no controversy about it at the studio. The only thing was that it wasn't, which I think I mentioned before to Aaron, that it wasn't the ending that we would have preferred to have had.
There was like 3 or 4 different endings that
Yeah.
you went through, wasn't there?
Yeah, each one was progressively cheaper.
Yeah.
That was it. It was strictly money. It was an expensive movie, and the original ending, which is probably the best one, was going to be they land and the aliens get out, and there's an immediate fight where if you don't contain them here, they're going to spread all over the earth, and they are stopped. Okay, and that was the original one,
The very first one.
the very first one that Joss wrote. Everybody liked it. Oh, great! So I mean, I'm thinking, good. Okay, so there's the movie, right? And then they budget it, and they go, no, we can't do it. Really? No, we can't. And
Fair.
and it ended up. It's interesting how it ended up going to this instead to a really interesting personal place, right? Which it would not have with any of the other endings.
With the big action piece instead of the small
Yeah,
confined.
yeah, and they were all action pieces until that one.
Okay, and that was a repurpose of, I think, one of the deaths from an earlier version of the script, if I remember rightly. Is it Perez was the general was supposed to die that way originally?
Oh, being sucked out, you mean?
Yeah.
I forget.
It was somebody else's death that
Somebody
got.
else, yes. Somebody, yes, yeah.
So you've mentioned you mentioned your contribution with the clone scene. Would you say that's the element of Resurrection's production that you're most proud of your involvement with, or are there other bits that you?
No, I'm proud of that in an ego way. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But I'm whatever. I'm balanced enough to go. That's my ego talking. Okay. No, I'm most proud of getting it made.
Okay.
And having it become something different. You know what I mean? Like being able to be creative in what was, taking Alien and sending it in a different direction. And then, in a different way, I'm kind of like impressed in a different kind of way in hiring Jean-Pierre just because of the ballsiness of it. But I told you it wasn't as ballsy or as crazy. It was as crazy as it looked, but it wasn't as ballsy as it looked because it was easier for me to get away with it at the time. But no, I would say the actual fact that I was making an Alien movie is the thing I'm most proud of. Is that I did it. I've got a note here. Let me see where it is. That it's kind of like, how often do you have? We all have certain fantasies, certain dreams, right? Okay, in your life, and on a certain scale, making an Alien movie would be one of mine, right? Okay, certainly on a career level, and I had a chance to make that dream come true, and I did.
Yeah.
I'm proud of myself for doing it, but I also know how lucky I was in having that opportunity and having it all work out the way that it did.
Yeah, I can understand that one.
Do you remember the first time you ever got to see the film in a fully completed state? Was it at the premiere, or were you also, you had mentioned you kind of watched it a bit as it was coming together? Were you involved with the editing much?
No, not really. No. And I watched it so many times. There was no, each time it had more effects. Each time it had more score or something like that, right? More sound design. But because the cut was more or less the same cut fairly early on, you start settling into it, where you just, nip and tucking here and there. So no, I don't have any memory of really, now that I think about it, any of the movies that I worked on going to the premiere. I mean, I had great experiences at some premieres, but that was more like, oh, look how the audience is reacting.
Yeah.
As opposed to, with
you
Speed.
seeing it come together.
Yeah, for the Speed premiere, that was an amazing experience. But I'd seen Speed a million times before I I saw it that night. So no, I don't have a good story about Alien in that regard.
And talking about, how audiences received films, Resurrection was very well received by overseas audiences and critics, although it didn't land as well in the States. As it stands, when adjusted for inflation, it's also the fifth most successful out of all the 9 Alien films at the box office. How do you feel about the response to the film now after all these years and the subsequent films?
Good. I was very bummed out at the time. you know, I was bummed out because it didn't work for people. Having a hard time figuring it out. I was wondering if people were just tired of the creature. At the time, I was thinking that. You know what I'm saying? Is it just plain not? Like when you see the goo. I remember there was a day when I was in dailies, and there was a close up of an alien in the movie, and you see the saliva dripping off. Okay, and I remember going, "Oh, cool!" Almost like a callback, Adam, like you were saying earlier. Like the saliva was a callback. That's almost my experience watching the rushes. And then I thought, okay, you shouldn't be looking at it that way. You should be being scared by it. Now, of course, it's only a clip, so it's not going to scare me too much, but it made me think about familiarity breeding, if not contempt, then stasis, you know. And I wondered if that was one of the things that hurt it. But honestly, I didn't know. I was just very disappointed in how it worked out and very gratified that it's such an unusual movie. It kind of figures with time, things that are different, their status usually rises.
Yeah, I think you can see movies that may have been divisive upon release. Some of them get reevaluated. And I feel like Resurrection is among those. Like Resurrection does have kind of a cult status now. I feel like just because of how unique and weird and interesting it is. Jeunet surely put his individualistic stamp on that movie. And I remember when I first saw it, I thought, I was like, what the hell is this? Just being a teenager, right?
Mhm.
But the older I got, the more I appreciated it. And I've come to love it. Like it's one of 2 Alien movies I haven't seen in theaters. And with the upcoming anniversary, I really hope I get the opportunity to, because it's become, one of my favorites in the
Oh, it's great.
series.
That's good to hear.
But yeah, we're not far from that 30th anniversary.
Yeah.
So looking back on Alien Resurrection, after all these years and your further experience in the film industry, can you think of anything you wish you might have done differently with it?
No, that I thought about this before, and I thought it would have been interesting to have seen a Guillermo del Toro version. And I'm saying that because that would have conceivably been possible. I mean, I remember arguing for him and just losing the fight. Okay, so um, but I can't say I'd rather see that than have the one that we did. I love Jean-Pierre's movie, right? So I would say I wish we'd had the money for a bigger ending, but I love this ending. So that's where you get into that conundrum of it's kind of like, not that I feel like it's my child in really probably any kind of way, but like you love your children, regardless of their flaws. And it becomes hard to evaluate them. I mean, you can evaluate them, but then at the end of the day, they're your children. And that's a rough analogy, but no, I mean, to me, especially not having seen it again, I just go, boy, that's an amazing movie. So then there's really, nothing beyond nitpicking that isn't worth talking about that I would have done differently.
Okay. And during the promotion for Resurrection, Joss Whedon had talked about the potential to return for a 5th film, but details on what direction he was going to explore or how far or how serious the attempts actually got aren't really known. Do you remember how far along a potential Resurrection sequel got? Was there a script? Was there a treatment?
just a conversation.
Right. Do you
And
remember the
really,
conversation?
between me, really. I don't think anybody else even talked about it.
Okay. So, sorry, conversation between you and Whedon?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you remember what kind of stuff was in the consideration for a fifth?
Having it, they were going to deal with it on Earth, and then from there go to the home planet and finish things there.
Would it have been a Giga World under your reign?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That would have been nice.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. Well, thank you for putting that one to bed.
Sure.
And you've worked with Clive Barker with your production company, Midnight Picture Show.
Mm-hmm.
Clive had been asked to both write and direct Alien 3 very early on, so we were curious as to if you ever talked to him about Alien while you were working together?
No, I never did. He never mentioned it. I didn't know that. And because I would have been too junior to know what they were doing, at that level. No, we pretty much, his whole focus in our partnership was get my stories made into movies.
Mm.
Like just get it done. And that was basically it. He wasn't that interested in talking about other stuff.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I remember. I mean, we had good conversations, but usually they were about his stuff. Like he's got a
Very
short story
focused.
called "The Madonna," which I don't know if you ever read. It's good. It's weird. And when we were making those films over there in the UK, I wrote a script for the Madonna that I really liked, and he read it and he said he loved it, and we wanted to make it, but then they didn't do well enough, so we didn't continue with that series, which is kind of mind blowing in my mind. Like with all the horror movies there are, how the Clive Barker train happens to be the one train that went off the rails. With me right there, helping drive it off the rails. But no, we never did.
Okay. So we know you're not a fan of the Alien versus Predator concept. You've said that today. You've said that in the past. But we were curious as to if it was ever something that actually came across your desk or you had any involvement with while you were at Fox.
Oh, I'm sure. Just because I was the Alien guy all of a sudden, right? So, right. So at that point, yes. John Davis, who had the rights, he had the rights to Predator, and then somebody wrote an Alien versus Predator script. I don't even remember who it was.
Peter Briggs did the first
Peter
one
Briggs,
that got forward to you.
That's who I'm thinking of, by the way. Not that's his name.
Okay.
Then I read something by him. That's who it was, not the other guy who we're talking about.
Stewart, yeah.
Stewart. Anyway, no, he came with that, and I remember thinking, yeah, but no, my desk is where Alien versus Predator comes to die. And mainly for the obvious reason, I think, that you reduce the alien by making it versus anything. I've never. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it certainly is an incredible balancing act to hit good entries in AVP.
Yeah. I just finished writing a novel that is set on a movie set, and it's a fake version of Alien versus Predator.
Okay.
It's called something else, and all the incidents are not from Alien versus Predator. They're all incidents from when I made Red Planet that I used in this fake.
Oh, interesting.
So it's so all the bodies are covered. But anyway, I'm mentioning that because when I was I think of why I'm telling you that actually right now. It just the way that even in my fake story. Okay, so what I did is I've never seen Alien versus Predator, but I did go on Wikipedia and look up what the story was, just so I could use a version of it in my book since I'm mirroring it. And I see that that the company is making aliens in in the Arctic or wherever it is, right, or in the jungle. Mine's in
The first one set in Antarctica.
Antarctica. Okay, mine's set in the jungle. Um, uh, but just how that's all they are, and then the predators are the ones that are kind of human, right? And so they're the ones that team up with the humans, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And the aliens are these creatures. You know what I'm saying? And with at this point no mythology. They're just the bugs that you want to get rid of. I mean, now it really is a bug hunt in my mind, without having seen it. Okay, and that to me had to be the case, almost like conceptually. You know what I mean? Like, how do you overcome that? And I mean, I'm picky about the things that I do, or up to the point that I can't afford to be picky. Back then, I could afford to be picky, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do Alien 4, 5, and 6.
Right. Okay. So Jorge is the reason AVP didn't happen in the 1990s.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it is. And when a movie failed, and I immediately saw John Davis like run the flagpole again with somebody else, I was gone. I mean, I left the studio right then, actually, and became a producer. So I wasn't there, but hearing from people, I said, "Yep, that's it. It's a new era over at Fox."
When did you leave Fox then?
End of 97.
97. So did you ever meet Emmerich for AVP?
No. Well, I wouldn't have met anybody for AVP, but Emmerich wouldn't have been involved in something like that, I don't think, would he?
He was apparently attached to a concept at some point in the mid-90s for AVP.
I mean, maybe that's true. But it's odd about that is that's when I worked with him on Independence Day.
Yeah, that's why I was just thinking.
Yeah, no, and I never heard anything about that.
Okay, so that must have been after you left them.
They went, yeah, but I'm trying to think. After that, he did Stargate, Independence Day, and then he did
Universal Soldier.
No, that was before. You're right.
Okay, right.
Not Godzilla. Maybe it was Godzilla. I forget.
Yeah, Godzilla was 98.
Yeah, so it's Godzilla. He did Godzilla next, and then he did Day After Tomorrow or one of those things, I think, or something like that.
Yeah.
Or the Revolutionary War one. I forget. But whatever he did, I don't see how he would have been there. I could see him being involved, arguably, as a producer.
I'm trying to find my article on this.
Yeah, but it just seems unlikely. It seems unlikely because he very soon thereafter quit working with Dean Devlin, his partner,
yeah,
and broke up the company. And when he broke up the company, he became a director. You know what I'm saying? Like, not with a big company. He didn't want the whole thing. You know what I mean? And that Centropolis, that was the company. They're the ones who would have been arguably working on Alien versus Predator. Except
it was 92, so it was before.
Okay, there you go.
Okay,
I would have had no clue, and he very well could have been, because back then, who's Roland Emmerich? He was doing the Moon thing.
Moon 19.
Yeah.
Moon 99, 98, something like that.
Yeah, Moon 90. What, I don't know, but that one. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. Sorry, I just
Yeah. No, that's interesting.
So that's actually everything from us. Before we do sign off, though, is there anything you'd like to share? Any thought or anecdote about your time on Resurrection that we just haven't given you the opportunity to with any of our questions?
No, it was one of the more enjoyable movies that I worked on it was hard because they were having a hard time because it's hard working with those creatures and all that stuff, right? But and, it's hard on the actors and so forth, learning how to swim. Oh, Sigourney learning how to swim. I'm going back now to how special she is. How how she swam underwater. Do you remember how she swam like this? And everybody else swims like this.
With the legs,
right?
kind of.
That was her. She tried to figure out how would an alien swim.
Mm-hmm.
And she swam her own way. That was her. Nobody told her to do that. Her idea, okay, for the basketball shot.
Yeah.
That wasn't us. That was, the script had something else. And then, no, I think it had a basketball shot, but I think it was just typical. It was just kind of like she turns around and goes like this. And then she spoke to a trainer, a basketball player from UCLA, and said, no, I want to do something super special. And then the guy showed her how to do it.
Still amazing she landed that.
And on the last try, because how many times are you going to let her do it, right? Because you got to, time's are wasting, right? And then she nailed it. But no, I would say that the final thing is that with all my, whatever, refusal to watch this or that so far, I'm still jealous of anybody who's, literally anybody who's still working on Alien, because it's such a cool idea. And even though I'm jealous of the idea of it, even though like earlier, I think the three of us were more or less agreeing that it's actually hard to push it to that place of revelation. That's not what it is, and that's not really what movies are. Movies are this really weird marriage of circumstance and money and inspiration, right? And that includes Alien, but it doesn't feel like it. And so when I let myself not remember that, I wish I could still do it. I wish I was still the Fargo guy. I wish I was Noah Hawley.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see how he does with the show soon.
Very curious.
Yeah. So wait.
Yeah, because it's serious. Yeah. Anyway, who knows?
He's good. It's an entirely different, as opposed to 2 hours. He's got his 10 hours now. It's a different playground for him.
Yes, and he's an ambitious person. So that's good. I mean, he might swing and miss horribly, but it could be really good.
Well, I think they've apparently already started gearing up for a season 2.
That makes sense.
Hulu, well, not Hulu, FX must have some confidence in him.
Yeah, good.
Right. Well, thank you, Jorge, for taking the time to come and nerd out with us. It's very much appreciated, and it is the fun part of what we get to do. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure to get to chat to people like yourself who make these things that we nerd out about and geek out about a reality. So thank you.
No, I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'll send you a photo that Jean-Pierre just sent me when I wrote him. I sent him the one that I sent you of me sitting by the egg.
I'll include that in the post of this.
He's sitting one of him right now, so it's, I guess, in his office. So he's got a big alien head, right? So it's kind of like he put his hand on the alien's head and then made like an alien face himself, except he put himself so close to the camera that he looks horrific. Because he's very childlike and playful all the time.
That's the best way to be.
Yeah, he's a lot more like the Amelie director than you'd think, an Alien director.
Yeah. That, just a tangent there to the side. That is one of the best films ever. Amelie.
Absolutely.
In my opinion.
Yes. Yeah. Right. That's one of those where you go, oh my God, how did how did I do that? You know what I mean? How do you, I'm always thinking about that kind of stuff. How does somebody's talent converge in a way that everything works, and then you can't do it the next time as a rule, right? And you didn't do it the previous time, and what is it? What was it? And who knows? But he certainly did it there. I agree.
Definitely.
Yeah, I need to watch more of his movies beyond Amelie. But yeah, for me as well, it was great chatting, and thank you for coming on.
And that was Jorge Saralegui. Once again, thank you to him for joining us to spend an hour and a bit nerding out about aliens and learning about the development of Alien Resurrection.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. So thank you again, Jorge. And that was a really great and insightful discussion about some of the nature of how these things work in the studio. They can certainly get turbulent at times, but that's what we like to do as fans, is see all the process, good and maybe more frustrating, that goes into developing these projects.
Indeed. And it's a thing I think most of us don't generally appreciate, is the politics and the processes behind the films. So, whenever we get to speak to somebody like Jorge and get a better understanding of the way it works, it's always very much appreciated and interesting and enlightening. Adam, where can folk find us online if they want to listen to our other interviews and such?
Thank you again for listening to our podcast. If you'd like to see our main hub of activity, you can check us out on our website, avpgalaxy.net, where we have all the latest news on the franchises. You can find our podcast there, editorials, interviews. So yeah, check us out there. We are also on all the major social channels: Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads, and now Blue Sky. We also have communities on both Steam and Discord. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you'd like to support what we do at AVP Galaxy, it's patreon.com/AVP Galaxy, where you can check out the different options for that.
Indeed. And a thank you to our supporters. They help us put together the edits for these podcasts, to be fair. The audio versions, they help pay for a post-production tool that's made my life a lot easier, which has allowed us to kind of put out more frequently, a bit more episodes. This would have been out in February if it weren't for my day job getting in the way. So, we're still subject to that kind of crap, but it helps us in general to really up our output. And we've been recording a lot more than we used to, haven't we? So, faster turnaround, faster things to put together. And they also help do things like help us send Adam to South by Southwest.
Yep, or Los Angeles recently to check out an event at Servios. But yeah, about the time this goes live, I'll be heading out to Austin, Texas to do some coverage of a big alien Earth event there. So again, our Patreon supporters, you make that sort of thing possible, where we can get on the ground and do reporting from these events. And it's a lot of fun for us, but we hope it's also informative for our community and our viewers.
Indeed. So if you're listening to this on the Friday or the Saturday that this is dropping, go check out the socials, because Adam's going to be posting stuff from the floor of this massive crashed spaceship in Texas. So go see what he's found, and then you can also keep an eye on the website and the YouTube. You're going to do a video? Or you're just doing?
Yeah, I'll do a video too.
Yeah. So keep an eye out on the website and the YouTube channel for some more in-depth coverage, I guess, of whatever Adam discovers down there in that crashed Weyland-Yutani vessel. But thank you to everybody for listening or watching, and thank you once again to Jorge. This has been Corporal Hicks
and RidgeTop,
signing off.